play the percentages and do whatever gives you the best chance to win. So I don't know. Maybe I kind of doubt this, but maybe I've been on the analytics train all along. I don't know.
Well, but I guess there's a difference between playing the averages and running these test tube scenarios. You know, I don't know. I feel old fashioned when I say that. Like I accept that, and I'm not anti, sort of evolution in sports. It's something about the combination of baseball, the way it transpires, and sort of eggheading your way through this. That just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah. Now, baseball is a little bit different than the other sports in as far as how much time a team is together, and I think that's where a manager can make a big difference in baseball, and I think it's really hard to judge a hire or determine what kind of a job a manager is doing beyond the wins and losses without seeing up close what the clubhouse dynamic is. And I really believe that makes a big difference. And again, especially considering how much time, a baseball team spends together over the course of a season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, but that gets you to a more organic set of relationships as opposed to, 20, I don't know how many people are on a baseball roster, but, 20 robots walking around, without having to think about each other. I don't know. By the way, I should go back to the Wild and apologize because I think after the Arizona game, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I said they could go 1-5 the rest of the month. I'm pretty sure that was my statement. And in fact, what they did was they went 5-1. So I could not have been more wrong about that.
Yeah, and Russo has brought it up, but was it after the loss in Nashville? I forget exactly which loss it was, but he flat out said, "Hey, I think we are just about hitting our stride here," and he's right.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of the opposite of good divisions, we move over to the NFL and the NFC North, or whatever the hell it's called these days. And I really don't have a problem with the Vikings taking advantage of a very generally soft and weak division at this point. Because we saw what the big gaudy record and the high expectations ended up doing for the Vikings last season. And I kind of feel like this team needs to have that sort of underdog chip on its shoulder, or at least that fits them better or does more for them than, having to read all the press clippings about how they're the greatest team of all time. So I as long as I'm making apologies for being wrong, I also need to apologize to Zimmer. I mean, I've been on him all over him for not adapting. Well, his defense's performance yesterday, apparently by the reporting, is a result. What came as a result of them realizing that other teams had adapted to his defense, as we saw at the end of last season, the start of this season. Him making adjustments, and now apparently it sounds like the defense is doing new and wonderful things, and quite successfully against, albeit not a good team in Detroit. But hey, it's a division game. You're at home, and after the Buffalo game, we can't take any game lightly. So if that's all true, if he has readapted his defense, and the byproduct is games like putting Matthew Stafford on his back 10 times, like we saw yesterday, then I stand corrected about his ability to adapt.
Yeah, that's a fair, but I mean, God, as lifelong Viking fans like we both are, and you don't even really have to go back very far in recent history. I mean, man, that was it 2 years ago we were all fired up about 5-0.
Yep.
And then last year,
Yeah.
13-3, and you get the big play at the end of the Saints game, and all of a sudden you're in another NFC title game. So I don't know. Does that bring us back full circle with the wild conversation about the regular season versus the playoffs?
Yeah, for sure. No, I in my mind, like I said, I think this Vikings team looks at this point. Granted, we've got 2 games with Chicago, both games against Chicago still in the docket, but I mean, they're going to be in a dogfight here to win the division, and that's good, I think.
No, I think it is too, and it very well could be decided in the next 2 weeks with Chicago and Green Bay. Which I believe are the next 2, after this week, the next 2 Sunday night games. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Now, I mean, does, how does this team do in prime time? Whatever. Look, we don't have to go to Green Bay in the cold, although we do have to go to New England in what could be, it's December 2nd, that game. So it's still a tough schedule ahead, but I don't know. Like I said, I'm comfortable with them needing to stay on the ball through the rest of the regular season, as opposed to getting out to some big lead in the division and being able to sort of relax a little bit. I don't think this team has proven that it's mature enough to handle that type of scenario. So let's keep them nose to the grindstone all the way through, and then hopefully, okay, so we got to play an extra game in the playoffs. Well. I think that's the lesser penalty in that scenario.
I would agree, but I definitely think I think the division is going to be decided in those next 2 games.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, could be, right? I mean, for sure. All right. So hey. The other thing about the Vikings that I just found ridiculous was people dumping on Kirk Cousins, and especially for the national media types to suggest that the Vikings weren't getting value for him. I just think that's absolutely nuts. I mean, okay, so the record isn't gaudy, but anybody who watches this, you cannot pin that on Kirk. I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, he needs to take care of the ball better, obviously, but somebody's throwing Adam Thielen all these balls.
Exactly right.
Somebody's throwing Diggs all these balls and Rudolph all these balls and whatever. And Cook had been out in the majority of the season. And so I just cannot imagine anybody saying that with a straight face. And if they were serious in dumping on him, then none of us should be valuing anything those people say about football, because they're just shooting stuff out of their ass, and it's ridiculous.
No, completely agree. And I think, I had a hard time listening to Zimmer, just do everything he could do not to give Case Keenum credit last year.
Yeah.
And that kind of drove me nuts. But it's kind of played out this year that, the Broncos are 3-6,
right?
And Keenum has been up and down, but he's definitely had some interceptions. I think Cousins threw his 5th pick yesterday, and
yeah,
I know for a fact that a couple of the picks that he's thrown have been, you could easily pin on the receivers for a deflected ball or whatever.
Oh,
but
right.
No, Cousins isn't perfect. He's not. I think most reasonable people would agree he's not in the Brady, Rodgers, whoever else you want to throw in that absolute top tier of quarterbacks. But I think he's probably in the next tier below them, and I think that with this Viking team should be good enough at that position.
Yeah. I found myself wondering yesterday watching the Vikings game. Boy, if only Stafford could play on a team that gave him a chance, and I don't know that I definitely don't think he's Brady or Rodgers either, but I kind of feel like we're seeing what that might look like this year with Cousins under center for the Vikings. That kind of scenario. Not that they're the same quarterback, but that, here's a quarterback who in Cousins who, is on a decent team for the first time in his career, even with a shoddy offensive line, and he's putting up high second tier, low top tier numbers in the NFL through half of a season.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I got no beef with him whatsoever. All right. That all being said, Lonnie, my friend, we've saved the best for last. Because the only area in the Minnesota sports team that I found any real rage and disappointment and frustration is obviously the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it's obvious at this point the issues with Butler being an asshole. But the problem is that he's got the leverage because, they're not playing well without him. They're not playing great without him. But he's a selfish asshole. And Tibbs is obviously, first place, just utterly smitten with Butler still. Can't believe that he wouldn't want to play with him and be his guy, which is pathetic to watch. But also just an extremely weak leader. I mean, Tibbs is beyond weak, in my opinion, at this point. But the story that isn't getting talked about is how, similar to Nino in a sense, but what's compounding the problem for the Timberwolves, as I understand it right now, and they're sitting at 4-6, and I don't know, looks like out of the top 8 anyway in the West. But what's compounding the problem, as far as Butler holding all the leverage when he sits out and they don't play well, is the fact that when he sits out, they don't play well, which means that Cat and Wiggins are actually the guys that Butler has said that he doesn't like, right? That they're not rising to the occasion and putting this team on their shoulders and saying, we got this, to hell with Butler, let's just do this. They're not doing that, and I don't know enough about them or basketball to know about their skill level. Everybody says they're both highly skilled and whatever, and Cat's got all these tools, and that's great, but they're not raising their games and that of the team when they need it the most, and in a golden opportunity to assert themselves as premier players and leaders of men and basketball players. And that is as much a problem as anything. And we're not talking about that. It's all Butler and Tibbs, as it should be. But if those guys were elevating and taking the team on their shoulders and whatever, then that takes some of the leverage, and the team was responding. That takes some of the leverage away from Butler, maybe gives a little bit back to the Wolves front office and being able to move him, or being willing to move him. And all of a sudden you've got a different dynamic. What do you think about that?
That's a great point. And I think Wolves fans are kind of sitting here going, okay, we got to get rid of the problem, and obviously Tibbs is showing a complete, utter lack of leadership whatsoever. But I think we are seeing the worst of all scenarios play out.
Yeah.
Which is, Butler's a huge asshole, but sadly, kind of looking like he's been right all along.
Yes. Yep.
And I think that's just absolute, just worst case scenario for all of this.
Because what it leads you to is, and I wasn't invested enough in the Timberwolves to really be up in arms about this, but there were Timberwolves fans who were. What that leads you to is, we got nothing. If Butler leaves, which he's going to leave eventually, we've got talented guys who aren't able to drive a team, right? In leadership positions, in coaching positions, and also in key player positions. So you worry about the Buxtons and the Sano's with the Twins. Well, it kind of feel like Cat and Wiggins are the Buxton and Sano's of the Timberwolves.
Yeah, it's definitely heading down that track for sure. So
you're staring at a huge abyss if you're a negative or a glass half empty T-Wolves fan right now, thinking rationally, and that's got to be we know that from the other teams, but what a crappy position to be in.
Yeah, and I'm not even going to pretend I know what fair market value for Jimmy Butler is, or what would be a good deal or what wouldn't be, but it's the same old thing with this franchise. It cannot stay out of their own way.
Right. Well, and that's the thing that's where I think Tibbs has a problem, is part of the problem, is that whatever intrinsic fair market value is irrelevant if actual market value is different.